Is the legacy of Franjo Tuđman's regime in relation to the joint criminal enterprise in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1993 properly reflected and re-articulated in Croatian public space?
We can certainly say, having in mind transcripts and historical documents, that the role of Franjo Tuđman in this historical process was a negative one. And certainly we can say that he is responsible for collaboration with advocates of Greater Serbia. Nevertheless, international politics, international community did condemn and Franjo Tuđman and also Croatian politics and this criminal enterprise in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We can also say that Stipe Mesić, ex-president of Croatia, did something in that direction, retired great number of nationalist generals, which was definitely an ambiguous gesture of condemnation. However, Croatian politics today did nothing in that direction. So 6 generals involved in Croatian criminal politics in Bosnia and Herzegovina during the 90s were convicted, together 111 years of prison in 2017. However, President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović refused to take away medals and tributes from them, and also Premier Andrej Plenković did nothing in that direction. So we can certainly say that this actual politics did not condemn those criminal actions.
On what ideas and principles is the process of historical revisionism in Croatia based? Also, what is the relation of these processes with the re-legitimization of the independent state of Croatia? And in general, what will be actually the ideological foundations and agendas encompassed in the Cold War against socialism and its legacy?
Well, historical revisionism is not something specific for Croatia, although it is one of the major problems in Croatia today. Actually, EU opened Pandora's box with 209 European Parliament resolution on a European consciousness and totalitarianism, which aimed to equalize so-called two totalitarianism, communism and fascism. So in equating what cannot be equated, we cannot equate fascism based on racist laws with communism as a vision of better future of solidarity, democracy, equal rights for all. Actually, EU opened this Pandora's box of transcending, I would say, this historical utopian moment of communist ideas, and what Alain Badiou said, it is a hypothesis, it is communist hypothesis. It needs to be rethinked again. But by this equation, actually what happened with European Union, we deleted the possibility of thinking about better future. And this is the case also in Croatia and in European Union, I would say. Totalitarianism ended up with a story. Every revolution is violent. It is better that we secure status quo than to have bloody revolution, etc. However, we see riots throughout Europe, especially in France today, from November 2018. We are experiencing guerrilla fights on the streets, so fewer and fewer people rely on that story about not having the possibility of better utopian ideas. Of course, we can also say that these utopian ideas are not formulated, they are not related to strong ideas related to communist ideas related directly to some kind of political and economic theory behind it, but nevertheless we cannot say that this status quo is today possible anymore. From this perspective of Croatia, I would say that in our auto-colonial perspective, we often force the idea that our nationalism is something exclusive and unprecedented. Well, I would say that Austria had their revival of racism and neo-Nazism with Austrian Freedom Party, Jörg Haider, and recently Norbert Hofer. It was really a really interesting situation. A few days ago, my party, Radnička fronta, protested at Bleiburg against Croatian fascists that commemorate, as they say, innocent Croatian soldiers. Among them, they were slaughterers from Jasenovac also. At the same time, Austrian television and media revealed a tape in which far-right politician Hans Christian Strache, vice chancellor of Austria, spoke with woman posing as Russian oligarch, discussing and providing the FPO positive news coverage in return for business contracts. It was obviously situation in which I would say we reveal the nationalist project, reveal its fallacy. Nationalist project only covers the business as usual, I would say, of capital and capitalistic elites. There is nothing fundamental and specific for blood and soil story and discourse in this national politics, and it is something that we certainly share with Austrian and every other nationalist politics. So this Croatian revisionism, as well as European revisionism, from my point of view, has only one major purpose: to discredit the idea of better society. So to say, the emancipatory project ends in blood. If communism is same as fascism, capital can go on with its business as usual because nobody cares, so to say.
So you would say that the process of historical revisionism in Croatia is not at all exclusive, that it is, you're saying that it's directly connected with a similar processes taking place in the first world, in Western Europe. And
I would say that a critique of political economy could provide us with somehow specific view on this problem, and it is a fact that capital is always concentrating in the center and always dividing people. So to say, and we have the situation in which European Union is itself forcing and promoting very unusual politics of equating to totalitarianism, and I would say that this divides center of Europe with the periphery of Europe, and also at the same time it divides specific capitalist elites and major population that is totally discredited in this neoliberal process of privatization, deregulation, flexibilization. So in these processes we have situation in which nationalism and new forms of neo-fascism work very well in the project of elites in dividing people. So it is very dangerous perspective that we are somehow using, from my point of view, too often, that is auto-colonialism. Auto-colonialism is very dangerous perspective in which we are to be told that we have some specific form of nationalist politics. Of course, we cannot hide the fact that it is one of the major problems in Croatia and in region generally, but we must see what is the economic purposes of this revisionism. Every time I see Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović in Bleiburg commemorating victims that end up on the wrong side of the history, victims among which there were not at all innocent slaughterers from Jasenovac, I see a very important question why this is happening. Is she so blind not to see that those innocent victims are far from that? I would say that it is not some kind of blindness, that it is some kind of very dangerous political and economic project that hides capital and capitalist subversion of this project that ended up, we must say also that ended up with Cold War, which ended up in 90s, but we have to be aware that this project that equates to totalitarianism has its purpose. It is not some kind of blind, bloody, totally necrophilic folklore that we are facing with. This project has its purpose, and this purpose must be analyzed.
It was for me even more interesting to see that actually now the Austrians, the right-wing Austrian party, was the one who actually made a distance toward what was going on in Bleiburg. And my question will be how you read this situation, because practically they are both ultra hyper-nationalistic, racist, but on the much wider arena, it seemed that they started to play two different roles.
Nationalists often work together, but in this case it wasn't the case. And I would say that nationalism in Austria didn't see any kind of purpose of providing a background for our nationalism, but also you can hear from Hasanbegović and Nesik or other nationalists in Croatia very interesting perspective. They often talk about world and society of not totalitarian, I would say, perspective, some kind of a world in which they also very often accuse this nationalism and this fascism. They say that they are for some kind of society of equal rights, and they are not pronouncing fascism, that this fascism is misinterpreted, or very often we have this discourse of misinterpretation. We are not fascists. And very often it is a comical gesture, because we see that they are obvious fascists, but they are talking about they are distancing from fascism. It is a kind of discursive practice, I would say, nothing else. And in this case, Austrian politicians didn't see any purpose of providing background for our politicians. Wendy Brown spoke and wrote about this practice. Slavoj Žižek talked about and write about this practice in which we have this society that promotes democracy, tolerance, equal rights. At the same time, it is providing ground for new forms of inequality. And these new forms of proto-racism, I would say, promotes economic racism, and it is a new form of racism. All of this elites and this recent situation with Austrian right-wingers, it's symptomatic for that situation, that this only provides cover for some kind of economic policy that is going on behind. Of course, we have liberals, we have democratic parties, social democrats, far right, working at the same direction of neoliberal policies that we can named as proto-racist politics because they provide a ground for inequality and systematic corruption that is providing a situation and society in which high majority of people cannot even have this equal rights on the ground of this totally formal and necessary rights as food, as a housing for all, as education, public and free education for all, and a situation in which we cannot provide medical care for all. So these basic rights are are not provided for very a large number of people. So we can say that this is a proto-fascism, and it has many forms. Of course, I cannot say that we can equate European right with social democrats, but European right is often only playing a folklore game for the majority of people, because majority of people has this very a dangerous, unequal situation in which they are finding themselves. One protester in France said that he don't want to live in a society in which he has to live in order to work, that he want to work in order to live.
If this racism is not just in the public space, but is also very present in the institutional framework, you talk about racialized economies. So how it's this seen in the Croat society?
I would say that from my point of view, it was really an important moment when we had some kind of transition. Croatian homogenization during the 90s was built on foundations of typical boundary discourse, ante murale Christianis, the last bastion of Europeanness, beyond which lay the uncivilized and violent geopolitical expanse of the Balkans. This particular geopolitical imaginary was, however, characteristic not only of Croatian identification, but also of other national identifications created through international homogenization and opposition to the others. So it was thematized, it was analyzed by many Orientalists. For example, Milica Bakić-Hajdn used the term nesting Orientalism to refer to the pattern of how the original dichotomy upon which Orientalism is premised is reproduced. And this nesting Orientalism, to cut the story short, functioned in a way that every nationalist would say that a country that is further south is a Balkan. So for us, Bosnia and Herzegovina was Balkan, and Serbia was Balkan. For Slovenia, Croatia was Balkan. For Austria, Slovenians were violent Balkans, and so on. But during this immigrant crisis, as it was discursively formed in the media, we had some kind of different and the form of nationalism and transformation of nationalism 2014-15 and during the closing of borders in Croatia. This period was referred as refugee crisis. During this period, we experienced embracing of the Western European xenophobia, and this nationalist and fascist discourse was completely different from those before. It was, so to say, imaginary identification with the West. So Croatians tried to look like Westerners and reproduced this kind of discourse. It was very symptomatic that Austrian right-wingers did not back up Croatian right-wingers in this case of Bleiburg. And on the other side, our nationalists and racists and the fascists tried to embrace this kind of this discourse in discursive practices that they learned in this process, mostly online, symbolizing Western Europe as fundamental, symbolic, so to say, other to Balkans. So unlike Europe as big other, the refugee assumed the role of the little other, I would say the imaginary other. The refugees as the little other occupied the same position, and it was interesting, same position in the structure of identification that used to be occupied by Serbs, Slovenians and Bosnians, as well as other nations in Yugoslavia. And in this process, I saw, by analyzing these online practices, these discursive practices, that in many ways, internet functioned as the public sphere's unconsciousness. So in this way, this crisis and the images of refugees always functioned as unofficial, uninstitutionalized, and in a way uncentralized media practices. It was really interesting to see how these statements pertaining to refugees show some kind of tendency of slipping away from the issues at hand into more peripheral content, where the signifier refugees begins to fill with various other elements such as famine or poverty, the war in Croatia, the Balkans and the Balkanization of Croatia, the state as penetrated body. It was interesting, terrorism, filth, animalism. Those issues were totally unconnected with refugees, but somehow this discourse slipped in this direction. So the internet speech about refugees appears almost as authentic speech of the unconsciousness, defined as the part of the psyche, composing as one major theoretician of psychoanalysis say the repressed contents which have been denied access to the preconscious system. Major politicians played a major role in this transgression of nationalism in Croatia. As Hebrang, for example, he provided us with really interesting metaphors. And other nationalists also. I won't go into details here, but it was really interesting to see how this transition of classical Orientalist nationalism transcended into more European nationalism, in which the most important thing politically was to see how our nationalism tried to reproduce and tried to form symbolical other, symbolical other in this nationalist discourse, in which we were trying so pathetically, I would say, to look like right-wingers in Germany, for example, or Austria.
What is going on with the Serbian, for example, minority?
Our far right is playing, so to say, with those minorities. They need those minorities in order to establish themselves as autochthon, authentic Croatian right-wingers. I would say that it is also interesting that political center is not any more interested in direct confrontation with these practices, and I think that this is really dangerous, because at Bleiburg only Radnička fronta and Austrian radical left and Slovenian radical left decided to come at the same day, at the same time, at the same place, when a Croatian Ustaša gathering was happening at the Bleiburg. That was the moment when we had to be there, not few days before, not few days afterwards, which happened with the Slovenian left came few days before, and also Croatian anti-fascist came few days before. We had to be there on the same day at the same place, and we have to confront this very dangerous right-wing Ustaša gathering. At the same time, those practices, unfortunately, is in a way left and totally redirected to the radical left, as if we are responsible to act against this fascism and this right-winger formats, and this center, social democrat center and liberal left is too good to oppose these practices and confront these practices in life.
In the same context, would you then say that anti-fascism was deprived of its connection with socialism and or anti-capitalist struggles?
Definitely. That is the most dangerous form in which anti-fascism, this civil form of anti-fascism, is divided from communist perspective. And we always say that anti-fascism was a communist anti-fascism, and communists were those guys who organized anti-fascist fights in Yugoslavia at the moment. And we are often faced with this transgression of civil anti-fascism. This goes in the same gesture, in the same political transgression of to totalitarianism, of this very dangerous political narrative that we had this fascism on the one side and we have this communism on the other side, and communism was the same as fascism, and neoliberals are promoting this narrative, not right-wingers in this traditional sense, but right neoliberals are producing this narrative that we have those totalitarian practices and we must learn from the history that never again we should go back to socialist and communist ideas of equal rights, social rights for all, better society, and opportunity for every individual to develop in full force for him or herself. And this narrative is in Croatia very, very strong, and again we have this historical experience that we should look back and see how neoliberalism is complotting with right-wing politics and nationalist politics every time when capital is at danger. So often is promoted from our political center that we should never go back. I would say that we should go back and learn from these historical practices as example and see how neoliberalism and liberal economic liberal politics will always complot with the right-wingers if they have some kind of interest in this. So even today we cannot only oppose this fascism as some kind of folklore, and also we cannot promote socialism in some kind of folklore and in some kind of remembrance practices, culture of remembering, historical musealism, so to say. we must remember socialism at its core as a live and vivid political and historical possibility of better society, more equal society, democratic society. Of course, we have to learn our lesson from real existing socialisms and see how socialisms failed in many ways, that it was social failure in many ways, in many perspectives, but we cannot certainly equate communist ideas with fascist ideas.
The memory of socialism is actually co-opted by institutions, so we have today also a big trend, for example, to remember the non-aligned movement as something actually just as narrative or a cultural artifact, but not to think of these elements that actually can open really a vision for the future. So my question will be, what is the role of the institutions and also the systems of knowledges, the way of how history is now retaken by institutions of public, let's say, importance in all these processes?
The best way to murder those ideas, to be sure that they will be murdered and killed, is to musealize those ideas, to make them, to approach them in the form of museal performance, in the form of culture of memory.
What would be the way, or one of the ways, how class-prefixed social conflict could be re-actualized in Croatia and or in the space of former Yugoslavia, let's say?
Certainly, we have to be very specific on what is left in Croatia, what is left in the region. And we have to provide bridges between our left and the left in region, because we have to oppose European Union, not because European Union is very some kind of bad institution or some kind of villain, but because capital elites are forming this European Union in this specific way that is bringing us and that is pushing us at a political economic periphery. Both Croatia, that is in European Union, and Slovenia, that is European Union, and Serbia, that is trying to enter this European community. But we have to build those bridges, because only in this regional form we can and we have the opportunity to oppose these neoliberal practices of deregulation of everything, privatization of everything, and flexibilization of every possible of every job. So we have to, from my point of view, democratic socialism is a form of this political actualization of socialism. It is a political term that is often disregarded as oxymoron, because what is the point of saying that socialism is democratic? Because if it is socialism, it is democratic. But nevertheless, we have to reflect real existing socialisms and reflect the failures of real existing socialism, and reflect those failures of deficit of democracy at the first place, and reaffirm socialism in a way that we stress the importance of democratic protagonism of every individual in this society, that socialism cannot be a project of political elites. So we have to form a different organization, different kind of mobilization of masses, and this recruitation of masses should be formed on democratic protagonism. Every individual has equal rights and has the opportunity to start a revolution, so to say, and to start political formations. So we have to From my point of view, democratic socialism would be some kind of answer. Of course, we have to also acknowledge that democratic socialism is differently described and defined in, for example, America, where Bernie Sanders almost promotes some kind of going back to position of welfare state. It is, somebody would say that this is some kind of social democratic policies, nothing more, nothing less. We have Jeremy Corbyn in UK that is promoting democratic socialism. We are always struggling in Croatia, but also this is not specific for Croatian politics, that we are constantly struggling with social democrats who are trying to promote some kind of social but also entrepreneurial form of socialism or socialistic practices, ending up at the end in complete failure, as we saw in Syriza, as we saw in recently in Portugal, as we saw in Spain. We have to also we have to address this problem of constituting socialist politics on the basis of some kind mild reformist neo-Keynesian practices and political and economic forms of more and higher taxation, some kind of redistribution, some kind of identity politics. But as we experienced in these examples in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal, and elsewhere, we have to be aware that okay, we can do that. That will be more equal society. Nevertheless, this will be more a democratic society, nevertheless, but this reformist socialist practices will end up in social democracy, and social democracy in every crisis actually provided us with the examples of how they choose capital in this game of capital with the human face, or capital with socialist practices, or capital with more social equality, democracy, and so on. In crisis, social democrats or liberal socialists dressing as socialists at the end will choose capital.